Hello, kindergarten and first graders. This is Mrs. Trinitza, and I am going to be recording our library lesson for this time. We are not going to meet on Zoom anymore for right now. I will record our lessons and I will put them on our library Google Classroom so that my friends who are staying virtual and learning from home will be able to go on your Google Classroom anytime that you're able to, and spend however much time you want looking at the library lesson. Okay, so let's get started. We are going to talk today about making connections, and we have done that in some of our past lessons. When Miss T said when you read a book and it might remind you of something about yourself, or if somebody reads a book to you and it might remind you about something about yourself, that's making a connection. But today you're going to learn, and we're going to talk about the three main connections that you can make when you read or somebody reads to you. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, your learning intention is that you can make a text to text or text to self connection when you read a story. Success is that you will successfully complete a drawing activity by making text connections when they read. And Miss T will talk to you about that here in a few minutes. And remember, our learning intention is what Miss T wants you to learn from the lesson. And success is what you should be able to do after the lesson. Okay, good job. So let's review really quick why reading is important. And I know we've done this a few times now, but it's always a good time to review. Remember, like when you guys are in class with Mr. C and you're doing your exercising your body. So PE helps you exercise your body. Well, reading helps you exercise your brain. You can learn new things, you can become smarter. It helps you get a great big imagination. You can learn new words. Because remember, you guys it's really important that you learn your ABCs and then you learn new words, and then that will help you learn to read. And I know a lot of you are like, well, I don't know how to read right now. And that's okay, because you are at that place right now in kindergarten and first grade where you're learning to read. And a lot of people are reading to you, which is really important too, because that will help you become better readers. Also, it can help you learn to speak. It can help your speech when you read a lot, when you learn how to read and you become better readers. Okay, so making connections with reading. It's not just about looking at words. Miss T could open up a book and I could look, and if I knew all the words, that would be great. But it's not just about being able to read the words. It's about being able to make a connection with the story I'm reading, or a connection with with the story that somebody might be reading to me. And it helps you better understand the story. So today I'm going to show you a strategy that good readers use to help them understand and remember what they read. Okay, that's why it's real important that you can make connections with books that you read or that someone reads to you. So let's go ahead and listen to this video about text connections, making connections, and it's going to tell us about the three different connections we can make.
Hey, do you like to play with connecting blocks? Most kids do. It's so fun to take two things and connect them together. The blue block and the green block fit together perfectly. Did you know that you can connect or put things together when you read too? Good readers make connections when they read. There are three main ways to do this. The first way is a text to self connection. Have you ever read something that reminded you of you and your life? For example, if you read about Janie falling off of her bike, it might remind you about a time you fell off your bike. Because you know what it is like to fall off your bike, you can better understand how Janie feels or what might happen next in the story.
So, this is a good point to stop and talk about it because you can make a connection. If the character in the story is doing something that you like to do, maybe a sport you like to play or riding your bicycle, that way you can make a connection with the story. And if you've ever learned how try to learn how to ride a bicycle and you fell off and got hurt, then you're making a connection with it. You can say, "Hey, that's happened to me before." Um, or if, like I said, if somebody's doing something like playing a sport that you like to, or they might be visiting somewhere that you like to visit, that's making a connection where you can say, "Hey, that's me too."
Let's read about Henry. Henry loved getting ice cream. He was so happy that Grandma was taking him for a treat. He ordered his favorite, strawberry. Then, the worst thing that could happen happened. The nice round ball of ice cream fell off his cone and hit the ground with a splat.
Now, this might remind you of a time when you might have had a snack and it fell on the ground. And it could have been ice cream, it could have been anything else. And once it fell on the ground, you might not have been able to eat it anymore. So you can kind of make a connection with Henry about him losing his snack and maybe how he felt, because he probably felt sad because he couldn't have a snack anymore.
Did reading that remind you of anything that's ever happened to you? If it did, you made a text to self connection. Maybe you've dropped your ice cream before. We call this text to self because the text reminded you of yourself. The second kind of connection is called text to text.
Now, with text to text, you can kind of think of it as a story to story, or even maybe if it's a nonfiction book, something that's real to another book. And what that means is when you're reading the book or the story, you are making a connection. You're reading it, or somebody's reading it to you, and you can say, "Hey, that reminds me of another story that I read," or "That reminds me of another nonfiction book that I read."
This is when one text reminds you of another. You might read one story and say to yourself, hey, that reminds me of a part in another book. Let's read more about Henry. Donnie saw what happened. He felt sorry for Henry, so he said, I will share my ice cream with Henry. Did that remind you of another text? It reminded me of another story I read about sharing. Look at the second book. Julia saw that Josh did not have a treat. She decided to share hers with him.
Okay, so if we look at this, we can see in the first book, Donnie saw what happened to Henry and he felt really bad for him. So he decided to share his snack with him. Well, this might remind someone of another story that they've read where someone also shared their snack because someone didn't have any. And that's what happened with Julia and Josh. So she saw he didn't have anything, and so she shared hers with him.
When Donnie shared with Henry, it reminded me of Julia sharing with Josh. The third kind of connection connects the text to the world, and we call this a text to world connection. When we say world, we mean anything going on around you. It can't be something that happened to you because then it would be a text to self connection. But it can be something that reminds you of someone you know, your mom, your brother, a cousin, your dog, or maybe it reminds you of a place like a school or a park. When what we read makes us think of something and it's not ourselves or another book, that is a text to world connection.
So remember, a text to world connection can be you're reading a story or someone's reading a story to you, and it might remind you about your family, or it might remind you about a place that you go to, like your school, or maybe the supermarket, or somewhere that you go out with your family. Or it could be somewhere that you visited before, like maybe a park or something like that. So that would be text to world. Let's just say that you're reading a story and the family goes on a camping trip. Well, You might think, oh, I've been on a camping trip before with my family. So that would be a text to world connection because your family also went on a camping trip.
Boys enjoyed the ice cream together, and when it was done, they picked up a baseball and played catch. Grandma smiled because she liked to see Henry feeling happy. Does that remind you of something in this world? It reminds me of watching my brother toss the baseball around the yard. It doesn't remind me of something that happened to me, and it doesn't remind me of another book. But since it does remind me of my brother, someone in my world, it's a text to world connection.
So you might read a story, or someone might read a story to you that might remind you, maybe the mom hugs their daughter or their son, or your grandma smiles at you, or your grandma gives you a hug, or your grandpa gives you a hug. Um, like in the story, if that happens, that might remind you of when that happens to you. So if, or when they might have hugged like a cousin or one of your sisters or one of your brothers. So if it happened in the story and you remember it happening in your world, like your mom or your dad or your grandma or your grandpa gave somebody a hug or smiled at them, then you're making a text to world connection.
His grandma smiling at him also reminds me of when my grandma smiles at my little cousin. Making connections when you read is fun because you get to think about what you know. And when you think about what you know, it helps you understand a story better. This is a great reading strategy, and you should practice doing this when you read. Let's review. Today, you learned that a text to self connection is when a text reminds you of your own life, yourself. A text to text connection is when a text reminds you of another text. And a text to world connection is when a text reminds you of something in the world. So go pick up a book and start reading. Make those connections. You will understand your book better and become a better reader.
Okay, everybody. So that was the video telling us about the 3 different types of connections that we can make when we're reading a story or having a story read to us. And it's going to help us understand the story better. Now, I would like to play a story for you that I think you're really going to like. It's called I Like Myself. What we're going to do is you're going to try to make connections while we're listening to this story. And then afterwards, I'm going to tell you about a coloring activity that we can do. Okay. So let's listen to the story called I Like Myself. And it's going to be about a little girl who talks about all the different things that she likes about herself. So you'll be able to make connections. Maybe some of those things that she likes about herself, you also like about yourself. So you'd be making a text to self connection. So let's listen.
Books with Blue.
Today we are reading a book called I Like Myself. I like myself. I'm glad I'm me. There's no one else I'd rather be. I like my eyes, my ears, my nose. I like my fingers and my toes. I like me wild. I like me tame. I like me different and the same. I like me fast. I like me slow. I like me everywhere I go. I like me on the inside too, for all I think and say and do. Inside, outside, upside down, from head to toe and all around. I like it all. It all is me, and me is all I want to be. And I don't care in any way what someone else may think or say. I may be called a silly nut or crazy cuckoo bird, so what? I'm having too much fun, you see, for anything to bother me. Even when I look a mess, I still don't like me any less, 'cause nothing in this world, can change what's deep inside. And so,
That was so silly. She had some bad hair, didn't she? Oh my goodness, her hair was all poofy. Sometimes we wake up and our hair is kind of silly, isn't it, from sleeping all night?
No matter if they stop and stare, no person ever, anywhere, can make me feel that what they see is all there really is to me. I'd still like me with fleas or warts, or with a silly snout that snorts, or knobbly knees or hippo hips, or purple polka dotted lips, or beaver breath or stinky toes, or horns protruding from my nose, or yikes with spikes all down my spine, or hair that's like a porcupine. I still would be the same, you see. I like myself because I'm me. Thank you for reading with me. Come back soon.
Okay, so that was a very cute story. So she told us all the things that she likes about herself. And she even says that no matter what, even if she had polka dotted lips, or if she had horns coming out, or if her hair's all crazy, that she just likes herself because she's herself, right? And that's what you should do too. Like yourself because you are you, and there's nobody else like you. So, what you can do now, if you would like to, if you would like to pause the video or have mom or dad pause the video, you can go get a piece of paper and some crayons or some markers if you have some. And if you would like to, you could draw a picture. It could be two pictures if you want. The first picture could be of the little girl and something that she liked about herself. And the second picture could be you and what you like about yourself. Now, it could be something on you. It could be your eyes, like she liked her eyes and her nose and her ears and her mouth. She liked her fingers and down here under my table or my toes. You could draw something like that, or you could draw something what you like to do. Is there a sport that you like to do, or do you like to ride your bicycle? Do you like to play video games? So you could draw a picture of yourself doing something that you really like to do. And you would be making your text to self connection. So you would be drawing something that you like, just like she said in the book, everything that she likes about herself. All right, good job. So if you go ahead and do that, and then you can start the video up again while you're drawing or after you draw. Okay, so now we are going to do a making connections activity together. Okay, what it's going to do is it's going to read a little piece of a story, and then we're going to see if we can make connections with it. And this will be good practice.
It was a hot summer's day, and there was no breeze. Linda wanted to open the window, but it was stuck. Instead, she walked out of the house.
Okay, so let's see if we can make a connection.
That reminds me of when I spent the day playing in the sun. I was so hot.
Okay, so up here it talks about how it was a hot summer's day. There was no breeze, so she needed to go out of the house. Here it says, it reminds her of when she spent the day playing in the sun. I was so hot. So, is that a text-to-text connection? Is it making a connection between a story and a story? No, good job. What about text to world? Is it making a connection from this text to something in her world? No, good job. What about, is it making a connection between the text and something that happened to her? Yes, good job, because it's reminding her of a time when she was outside and it was really hot.
Correct.
Good job.
That reminds me of when I read about the different seasons in a year.
Okay, so let's look. Up here it talks about a hot summer's day. And then here it talks about the seasons, and summer's one of the seasons. And if you look, we have a little hint when I read about the different seasons. So is that going to be a connection between the story to another story or text to text? Because up here it talked about the seasons, and here it talks about the seasons. But when I read, which means it's a book. So yes, good job. Text to text.
Correct. That reminds me of a story my friend told me about trying to open a window, and when he turned the crank too hard, it shattered.
Okay, so let's look. So up here it talks about that Linda wanted to open the window, but it was stuck. Well, this is reminding the person about their friend who told them about a story about their window when they tried opening that it broke. So is that a story, a text to another text connection? No, it doesn't say anything about it reminding them something about a book. What about text to world? Because it does say it reminds them about somebody in their world, their friend that told them a story about something that happened to them. So yes, I think the connection would be text to world.
Correct!
Good job.
That reminds me of the time we brought home a turtle.
Okay, so this talks about being really hot, not being able to open the window, so that she walked outside to get the breeze. Does that have any connection to bringing home a turtle at all? No. Good job. So Miss T is going to put
Correct!
no connection. Good job. Okay, let's try another one.
My dad and I were solving math puzzles. My dad is very smart and he loves math. I am a little scared of numbers, but with Dad by my side, I was having fun.
Okay, let's see what kind of connections we can make with this.
That reminds me of the time when my mom and I did math homework.
Okay, so this talks about her and her dad doing math puzzles. And then here it says that it reminds her about doing her math homework with her mom. So is it making a connection between a story and another story? No, because this isn't talking about a book. What about text to world? No, because it's talking about her doing her math homework. How about text to self? Because it's reminding her about when she did her homework.
Correct!
Good job.
That reminds me of the time when I solved math puzzles from a library book.
Okay, so up here it talks about my dad and I solving math puzzles, and then here it says it reminds the person of a time when they solved math puzzles, but it was from a library book. So that's your clue, library book. So is the connection a text to text? Is it between here that was in a text and another story or another book? And yes, it is, because it says library book. Good job.
Correct! That reminds me of a time I read a story about numbers fighting with each other.
Okay, so this talks about that she's a little scared of numbers. And then here it talks about it reminds her of a time when she read a story about numbers. So there is a connection because it talks about numbers, but the connection, it says read a story about numbers fighting. So there's our clue, read a story. So would that be a connection text to text? Yes, it would. Good job. Because it talks about numbers up here. And down here it talks about reading a story about numbers. So it's reminding us about something from a book.
Correct!
Good job.
That reminds me of the afternoon I took a long nap.
Okay, so this is talking about solving math puzzles and being a little scared about numbers. This is talking about taking a nap. Does one have anything to do with the other? Would there be any connection in there? What do you think? If you said no, then you are completely right. There is no connection between the two.
Correct!
Okay, let's do one more, and then we'll be done.
Liz was homesick one day, and she was bored of lying on her bed. She sat up and looked out of the window. Spring was just beginning, and yellow flowers were growing in the field outside.
Okay, so let's see if there's any connections we can make.
That reminds me of the time I read a book about how flowers grow in the spring.
Okay, so this is talking about it being spring and yellow flowers are growing outside. This talks about that it reminds someone about a time they read a book about flowers growing in the spring. So what clue do we have here? We have a clue that it reminded them about something they read in a book. So we'll know it's text to text, right? Because we're taking something that was in a book or in a text, in a story, and it reminded us about something else that was in a book.
Correct.
Good job.
That reminds me of the time Mom and Dad bought yellow flowers for Grandma when she was sick.
Okay, so it says Liz was homesick and she was bored of lying in her bed, so she looked out the window and she saw the flowers growing in the field. Down here it says it reminds someone of a time that their mom and dad bought yellow flowers for Grandma when she was sick. Well, let's see. Is that a text to text? Does this remind the person down here of something from a story in a book? No, good job. It doesn't say anything down here about it being from a story. What about text to world? And remember, text to world is when it reminds you of something that's in your world, like your family or where you live or your school or somewhere that you take a trip. So yes, it would be text to world because this reminds you about something about your family. It's about your mom and dad giving yellow flowers to your grandma when she was sick. And your mom and dad and your grandma would be something in your world.
Correct.
Good job.
That reminds me of the time I broke my leg and had to stay home.
Okay, so it says she was sick and had to stay home. And this says it reminds her of a time she broke her leg and had to stay home. Well, breaking your leg, that's just like being sick, right? And Liz had to lie in her bed, and this person down here had to stay at home. So is that text to text? Does this have anything about reminding her of something that was in a story? No, good job. What about text to world? Well, it doesn't really talk about anybody in her world, like her family or a place that she knows. What about text to self? Yes, I think you're right, because this is talking about it reminding her of something about herself, that her leg broke and she had to stay at home.
Correct.
Good job.
That reminds me of the time I wore 2 different socks to school.
That's silly. That's happened to Miss T before when she's been really in a hurry in the morning or even wearing 2 different shoes. But does wearing 2 different socks, is there any connection between that and being sick and seeing flowers outside your window? What do you think? If you said no, you're right. There's no connection there. So we will click no connection.
Correct.
Okay, guys, excellent. Good job. You guys are so smart. All right, so that is our lesson for today. We talked about making connections, the 3 types of connections, how you can do that. Hopefully you drew a picture to help you make a connection with the story, I Like Myself. And we also did practicing to see if there were connections between parts of a story and things that people were reminded of, and you guys did such a good job. So this is it till next time. I want you guys to stay good, do your job, do your schoolwork, listen to your parents, listen to your teacher, and Miss T will see you next time.